Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you listened to my story. Please give me a follow and like the video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and provide feedback so I can improve the sound quality. Yes, I will now continue the unfinished story. Chapter 35, Being Still, 2. Rosalind started to smile. I heard you were trash, but I guess that was a lie. Rosalind stopped with the respectful tone almost immediately, as Cale had expected. Although the majority of the people may not know what the princess of another kingdom may look like, it was different for nobles. Low-level nobles may have found it difficult to gather information, but at the count level, like the Henituse family, having information about the neighboring kingdom's nobles and royalty was basic knowledge. It was not just fun and games to be a noble. Cale responded to Rosalind's statement. It is true that I am famous for being trash. However, a mage should make their judgments based on their 5 senses. You are right, young Master Cale. We only believe the things we experience ourselves. Cale thought Rosalind's way of speaking was quite odd. She was speaking informally to him as a princess, but when she was referring to herself as part of the Society of Mages by using the term, we, she spoke formally. Her identity as a mage seemed to be very important to her. But Princess Nim, Rosalind, she really didn't seem to like being treated like a princess. Okay then. Miss Rosalind, are you done with your questions? Yes. I am finished. She smiled as she answered. Young Master Cale, it seems like you do not want to be involved with me. Even though he knew she was a princess, he just told her to enjoy her stay and then leave. It wasn't that she found that to be disrespectful or anything. In fact, she preferred it that way. If she wanted special treatment, she would have revealed her full name and her identity immediately. She did not want to be treated that way, however. In addition, she was thankful to Cale for telling them about Locke's condition. Really? I just acted that way since Princess Nim seemed to prefer it this way. Liar. Rosalind treated Cale's words as just a good excuse. A human who travels with a dragon. He was known to be trash by society, but was not actually like that in reality. He could have easily revealed her existence if he really wanted to do so. She thanked Cale, who was smiling as if he knew nothing. It seems like you have not informed the Roan royalty. Thank you very much. No problem. Something like that should be based on the involved individual's own wishes. Cale thought that the crown prince would barge into this residence if Cale had reported it to the palace. You are correct, young Master Cale. I do not wish to reveal myself. If this lands you into trouble in the future, please let them know that I asked you not to do so. I will send a messenger to back up your story. Thank you for letting me stay here. I will take care of my business and not cause you any trouble. Not cause me any trouble. Cale thanked Rosalind, who was giving him the answer he wanted to hear the most. No worries, it is how it should be. Rosalind brushed Cale's thanks off before continuing to eat. Cale and Rosalind, the two of them did not need to speak anymore. Rosalind just peeked at the dragon every so often. She couldn't help it. As a mage, her gaze continued to head to the dragon. The dragon stopped eating the sausage that originally was for Cale before turning to look at Rosalind. After ignoring Rosalind's continued peeking for a while, he finally spoke up. Eat your own food. This is mine. The black dragon pulled the plate with the sausage closer to him. Cale was casually piling more food onto that plate for the dragon. The black dragon was getting addicted to the taste of steak, which was different from eating raw meat, as well as the other types of various foods that were on the table. Rosalind peeked toward Cale, and Cale stealthily put up 4 fingers without the dragon noticing. 4 years old. Rosalind smiled at the meaning of Cale's message, and responded to the dragon. Yes, Dragon Nim. I would not dare eye your food. The black dragon started to eat again, and Rosalind and Cale continued their meals as well. It was a relaxing and peaceful meal. After it was over, Cale got on the carriage to go meet the northeastern nobles. The northeastern nobles consisted of just 10 noble families. There were more if you considered the barons and below, but the pillar of the northeast was based on these 10 families. Of those 10 families, the 3 people Cale was meeting today came from 3 families that had been friendly with the Henituse family for a long time. What a dilemma. That was why Cale was worried. Choi Han, who had been following him as a guard, cautiously asked. What is? If I can do anything to help, please let me know. Nothing. You don't need to know. Cale just curtly answered before starting to think again. Choi Han observed Cale and started to worry as well. It was the first time Choi Han had seen Cale worrying like this. Cale did not know what to do. Just what kind of chaos would he need to cause to really look like trash? Cale had come to a realization after being stuck with large baggage like Choi Han and the Black Dragon. He was having a dilemma about how to live a trash life. The northeastern nobles would have seen Cale's trash behavior in the past. They would have also received news about all of Cale's trashy actions in the Henituse territory. That was why he had to be even more careful. No, he had to be even more chaotic. Cale looked down at his 2 hands. Act like a total bastard? That would be a way to seem like the trash of all trash. While Cale was thinking about what he could do to act terribly, the carriage stopped in front of a residence. Since the northeastern nobles all had residences in the same area of the capital, it was not very far. Welcome, young Master Cale Nim. Cale noticed the old butler greeting him at the gate, and looked to the building behind the butler. This was Count Wheelsman's residence. Count Wheelsman's territory was located in the beginning parts of the northeast, and he was neither very strong nor very wealthy. That was why he was able to build a close relationship with Count Henituse in the northeast, where they did not have any dukes or marquis. Count Henituse liked this friendship because, for someone like him, whose territory was far in the corner of the northeast, knowing someone who was the close to the capital was beneficial. Cale thought about Count Wheelsman's successor. Eric Wheelsman. Deputy Butler Hans had cautiously advised Cale before he left for this meeting. Young Master, it is great that you have a good relationship with young Master Eric, but I bring this up to you to ask whether you think it would be smarter to not act so close to each other in front of the other nobles in the meeting. That let Cale know that Eric and the original owner of this body were very close. However, the information about Eric in the nobles' information report described Eric as a good person who was a bit uptight. Young Master Cale, may I escort you inside? Cale followed the old butler into the Wheelsman residence. Eric Wheelsman, Gilbert Chetter, and Amiru Yabar. The 3 of them were inside the residence. Cale was still thinking about how he should act in front of them as he entered inside. In the end, he didn't need to worry about such a thing. Cale. You at least still listen to this young. Right. Cale had a confused look on his face. Eric Wheelsman pushed up his glasses after seeing Cale's expression. Right now, Cale was seated at the table with the 3 nobles surrounding him like he was in an interview. This is odd. But the atmosphere was more of them consoling him rather than interviewing him. Eric Wheelsman started to speak. Won't it be annoying for you as well? Viscount Yabar's daughter Amiru and Baron Chetter's son Gilbert chimed in. He's right. Young Master Cale, I heard you don't like annoying formalities. Young Master Cale, it is not wrong to find something to be annoying. It felt like they were trying to console a child. Cale first responded to their statements. Yes, it is annoying. See. That is why. Eric lightly tapped the table. It did not seem like it was because he was angry, but more like a subconscious movement. He looked toward Cale, who used to be a cute little kid until he grew up to be trash, and quietly continued. That is why you don't need to say anything or do anything. Just be still. Be still and we will take care of everything for you. You hate annoying things and formalities anyway. Cale responded back with an intrigued expression. I am very good at staying still. Huh? You are? Ah, yes. You are like that. You are very good at that. Eric was known for being uptight, but he was also the type to worry about everything. But that was only because he liked to think about everything before they actually happened. He started to speak to Cale, who became the biggest concern of his since yesterday, when he found out that Cale really was the one to come to the capital. The other two looked toward Eric as if they were cheering him on. Some of the other northeastern nobles may try to annoy you. The ones who align themselves with Marquis Stan or some other duke will definitely try. But all you have to do is be still and we will take care of everything for you. What do you think? This was what Eric was most worried about. Of the 10 pillar families, only these 4 families have not aligned themselves elsewhere. The other nobles who aligned with higher-ranking nobles from outside the area would want to offer the entire northeastern group of nobles to their upline. They needed to be cautious, and even more cautious. This group of 4 families had to be in the center. That was their way of being the strongest faction in the northeast, and, in order to do that, the wealthy Henituse family could not cause an accident at the capital. Eric, as well as the other 2, quietly waited for Cale's response. That would be great. Cale had a gentle smile on his face to go with his response. Eric was thinking that Cale still looked like the good kid from the past, as long as he was not drinking, and started to speak. I plan on showing our respect to the Crown Prince together as well. I'm sure you find this to be annoying and want to get right to drinking, but that will be difficult. As long as you do that initial greeting, we will take care of everything else. Oh. Cale started to smirk. He found this atmosphere quite interesting. He picked up the wine glass in front of him. Cale could see Gilbert flinch as he did that. Cale thought this was odd as well. He may be a troublesome trash, but since they were on the same side, their only possible course of action was to protect him. He wet his mouth with the wine, before starting to speak. It's great. Eric had a bright smile on his face as his glasses reflected the light from the chandelier. Cale decided to take the 3 nobles' offer of doing nothing and getting their protection. He liked this plan very much. All you have to do is show up, sit there, and relax. Great. It sounds perfect. It was a very good offer, just the type Cale liked. He calmly ate the meal in front of him, as he started to think that it was a good idea to come here today. However, Eric, Gilbert, and Amiru did not let their guards down. Cale Henituse was someone who had even thrown a bottle at the Northeastern nobles meeting when everything seemed to be going great. They were especially cautious because they were here to convince the Crown Prince to invest in the northeastern coastline, where Gilbert and Amiru's families were positioned. Wine from the Henituse territory really is great. Of course, Cale knew about the 2 families' desire for the Crown Prince's investment from the information Hans had given to him. The 4 families shared information with each other without any secrets. However, Cale knew that the investment from the Crown Prince would not be possible. How would he be able to invest when a war will soon start from the south of the western continent? It might be different if it was a navy though. The 4 nobles chatted every so often as they continued their meal. The 3 nobles relaxed a bit after seeing Cale make it through the whole meal without causing an accident. They were all decently satisfied with this meeting. Cale rested for a bit after returning to his residence, before hearing that Choi Han was back, causing Cale to call him to his room. Cale Nim, you called for me. The inn. Fine. Thankfully, the children are energetic. Cale turned pale after thinking about 10 energetic wolf tribe children. On the other hand, Choi Han seemed to be more relaxed and happier. Then there is nothing else to do. Cale nodded his head before standing up. It was only then that Choi Han realized that Cale was not wearing his pajamas nor his usual outfit. He was wearing very casual clothes. Cale walked over to his bed as he started to speak. I will be laying in bed, so go tell Hans he can stop standing outside the door and can go sleep. He will go without even looking back. Choi Han looked out the open terrace window. It was a bright night. He then asked Cale, "Will you be heading out?" Cale smiled as he answered, "I left the terrace open like before, so come to my room." Choi Han's gaze changed. He remembered what Cale had told him the other day. Cale mentioned that he would tell Choi Han how to find that blood-drinking mage. "Will it just be the two of us, without either An or Hong?" Choi Han asked with a serious expression, but an answer came from somewhere else. "I will be going as well." The black dragon removed its invisibility magic and entered through the terrace window. Choi Han looked toward the black dragon before turning back to look at Cale. Cale answered even more relaxed than ever before. "The three of us will go." Chapter 36, Being Still, 3. Choi Han looked at the black dragon before looking back toward Cale and asking, "Are we going to destroy everything?" "No. Absolutely not." Why are his thoughts always so extreme? Cale laid down on the bed and waved Choi Han away. "Hurry up and come back soon. Oh, and wear a hat." Choi Han left only the nightstand's light on and turned the rest of the lights off before heading out of the room and saying something to Hans. Cale kept his eyes closed and pretended to be asleep. The door soon closed and Hans did not enter. The black dragon, who had been invisible while the door was open, removed its invisibility and landed on the bed. One side of the bed started to sink while the dragon started to speak in a worried voice. "You cannot really fall asleep." Cale started to think after hearing the dragon's words. "Do I look like a 4-year-old to this dragon?" Cale let out a sigh and got up from the bed. A few moments later, Choi Han re-entered the room through the window while wearing a robe. "You're here. I guess a robe is definitely better than a hat." Choi Han nodded and started to speak toward the dragon as Cale packed a hat. "Will you be following us like that?" "I will be invisible." "I heard that dragons could polymorph. Can't you turn into a human?" "I think that would be easier." A dragon's magic was an expression of their will. That was why Choi Han thought that the dragon could easily polymorph if it had the will to do so. The black dragon snorted at Choi Han's words. "I hate humans. I do not want to be like the humans." He said that dragons were cool and awesome. "Who said that?" The black dragon peeked toward Cale at Choi Han's question, before quickly looking away. It then turned invisible and flew up into the sky. The sunken part of the bed returned back to normal. Cale leisurely started to speak to Choi Han, who was looking at him with an odd expression. "Dragons indeed are cool. They really are." Choi Han nodded his head and followed behind Cale, who was heading toward the terrace. He then looked out the third-floor terrace window and stopped suddenly. Cale Nim. Do I have to carry you again?" Cale snorted at Choi Han's hesitant question, and pointed to the ceiling with his index finger. At that moment, Cale's body slowly lifted off the floor and started to turn invisible. Cale watched his entire body turn invisible before looking up to the ceiling and starting to speak. "Dragons are great and mighty." "You are right. I am great and mighty." The invisible black dragon responded to Cale. Choi Han could see Cale's evil smirk quickly appear before disappearing. Choi Han realized how Cale was controlling the dragon and he started to speak as well. "Wow, dragons are great and mighty." Once Choi Han said that, he turned invisible as well, and they could leave the residence without any worries. Of course, there were magic detection tools around the residence fence, but they were for preventing intruders. They did not have any reaction to people leaving from the residence. Choi Han stood at a small alley a bit away from the residence, and started to speak. "It is fine from here." As soon as he said that, the invisibility magic on Cale and Choi Han was removed. Cale, whose levitation magic was removed as well, landed gently from the 10 centimeters he was floating in the air. Cale was shocked at this chain of events. "The black dragon's magic skills are much stronger than I thought. I wonder if it is related to its special characteristics." This level of magic was already a bit higher than the level of the highest tier mages. It was no wonder that they said that an adult dragon could easily destroy an entire kingdom if it was willing to do so. But I won't need his help like this once I get the sound of the wind. I can then move around without the black dragon or Choi Han coming with me. The sound of the wind was the third ancient power Cale was planning on taking. However, he needed to head to the Rhone Kingdom's northeastern shores to find that power. I'll need to go to young Lady Amiro's territory. Cale was planning on heading there to get the sound of the wind on his way back from the capital. His excuse to others would be that he wanted to go sightseeing, since he was already out. The fact that it was an ancient power by the sea made him a bit concerned, but Cale decided to not think much about it because it was a power that he could quietly take. By then, Choi Han's crew won't be with me anyways. Cale was certain that the whale tribe and the mermaids appeared at the northeastern shores around the end of Volume 4. The war in the ocean between the eastern and western continents. All he had to do was avoid the shores at that time. More than the whales, he needed to avoid those crazy mermaids. Cale covered his red hair with his hat, before taking a map out of his pocket. He then took the lead. The still invisible black dragon and Choi Han walked on either side of Cale, following Cale out of the southern district of the nobles and into the center of Hwis. The night became as bright as the day as they got closer to the center of Hwis. There were many bright lights on the streets with shops selling stuff, and bars were the most lively at this time. The nightlife at the capital is really different from other places. It sure is. Cale nodded his head at Choi Han's words before heading toward the Plaza of Glory at the center of Hwis. They could see a round plaza in front of them with fountains in all four directions. Each fountain had groups of citizens gathered around it. The three of them could see the citizens relaxing with their families or friends after a long day of work. Since it was 9 p.m. right now, they would continue to enjoy themselves at the plaza until the guards came to patrol at 11 p.m. Cale looked to the left. Choi Han was blankly watching some families laughing together at the fountain to the east. Cale, who had been leisurely watching Choi Han and the scene in front of them, started to speak. "Make it so nobody can hear us." Once he said that, an invisible dome appeared around them. It was something that only Cale, Choi Han, and the Black Dragon, who were inside the dome, could see. Choi Han finally turned to look at Cale. "There is this thing called a magic bomb." "A bomb?" "Yes. A bomb. Magic bombs can come in many shapes and sizes. With this western continent having a long history of war that was led by magic, it has developed quite a bit." Choi Han quietly listened to Cale's story. "However, there are a lot of restrictions. The location of the magic bomb, controlling the mana flowing through it, and many other factors cause these bombs to be really complicated to use. That was why they preferred to have a mage use their magic during war rather than using magic bombs. But the magic bombs this time are different from those used previously. Of those bombs, newly developed magic bombs will go off here, as well as multiple places around here, in 6 days. Cale did not think that the 5 bombs Choi Han and Rosalind had found in the novel would still be the same. The story had already changed. That meant that this situation could easily change as well. That was why Cale came up with a new plan. However, he was still certain that the magic bomb terror incident would still proceed as described. "Since I was able to confirm that the crazy mage was in this kingdom. The crazy mage was the one who created this new magic bomb. The secret organization would eventually distribute this bomb to different territories in the Rhone Kingdom after the incident at the capital. Of course, they will be hiding their identity as the secret organization." "Are you saying a bomb will go off here?" Choi Han looked around at the fountains and the people in the plaza. A cold voice filled his ear at that time. "It could be buried somewhere or even installed on a person. Of course, that person will not know it is a bomb and think it is something else, like a bracelet or a purse, and have it on them." "On a person?" That phrase made Choi Han turn his head to look at Cale. Cale responded coldly to Choi Han. That is why we need to prevent it? Of course, Cale would not do it. Choi Han, Rosalind, and the Black Dragon will be the ones to take care of it. Cale planned to be still. Cale planned to be very still at the capital. How can we prevent it? Simple. Cale crossed his arms as he leaned on a tree in the plaza and continued to speak. Magic bombs are in essence chunks of mana. That is why all you need to do is have someone with high mana sensitivity inspect the area and search any locations that seem to have an abundance of mana. Choi Han flinched at Cale's calm demeanor before cautiously asking. Is it so much higher that it will be that easily detected? No. It is just slightly higher, making it difficult for any average mage to notice it. But that small chunk of mana can instantly pull in the mana in the surrounding area to create a large explosion. Choi Han looked concerned. As a sword user and an aura user, he was slightly sensitive to mana as well. However, he was not as sensitive to it as mages, and could not be of help. Cale, I do not think it will be easy. It is very easy. Cale answered that way as he asked. Right. At that moment, an answer came from above. It is doable. Just annoying. Next to Cale was the Black Dragon, an existence that was said to be the most sensitive to mana. Choi Han quickly understood and nodded his head. He had forgotten that this dragon was a great and mighty existence. Cale handed the map in his hand to Choi Han. I don't know about the people, but the bombs installed in locations will be installed at least 2 days before the incident. The day of the incident would be when the king arrives. That meant that the security would be multiple times the normal level starting from the day before. That's why they needed to install the bombs at least 2 days before. I don't know about the other locations, but I am certain that at least one bomb will be near this plaza. This is the place with the most people. Right. I agree. That is why, with this plaza as the center point. Cale pointed toward Choi Han and then up to the sky. Choi Han, you and the dragon will roam around the capital every night to look for the magic bombs. The two of us. Cale patted Choi Han's shoulder and answered as Choi Han asked. The way to handle the Black Dragon and Choi Han was pretty similar. Yes. Choi Han, if it is you, I know that you can stealthily move around without being noticed. You are very talented. Choi Han quietly nodded his head with a serious expression. He then asked. What should we do once we find it? Leave it there for now. Not get rid of it? We will get rid of it on the day of the incident. May I ask why? Cale started to smirk. Don't you want to find that mage? It was not the answer to Choi Han's question, but Choi Han first nodded his head. Cale looked around the plaza. Everybody looked happy, but members of the secret organization may be mixed in with them. Cale did not know where that blood-drinking mage was located. The mage may be hiding somewhere or roaming around under a disguise. A mage needs to be present in order to make a magic bomb go off. The mage who made the bomb needs to remove the restriction to set it off. Then dash. Choi Han started to speak as a thought came to him before stopping himself and looking back toward Cale. Cale continued on in an uninterested voice. First, find the bombs. If you happen to get lucky and find the people installing the bombs, follow them without getting noticed. Since the Black Dragon will be with him, Choi Han would stop right before he would be detected by magic. But Cale thought it would be difficult for them to find those people in the process. It will take a lot of work to look for the locations with a slightly elevated mana fluctuation to find the bombs. It will be very difficult and tiring. That was why Cale left this task to the two of them. He would not be able to help, but, more importantly, he didn't want to do it. Then do we just have to roam around until 2 days before the event? No. The two of you will need to come the day before as well. The day before. Wouldn't it be difficult because there will be a lot more guards? Choi Han did not ask his question. It would be difficult, but still manageable for him. He would just need to spend a little more effort and be a little more cautious. At that moment, Choi Han could see Cale with his villainous smirk once again. Cale took a black orb out of his pocket and showed it to Choi Han. Choi Han let out a gasp. He was familiar with this black orb. It was the mana disturbance tool. It had been used by Cale once before. It was strong enough to have a range of an entire mountain. Cale leisurely smiled as he started to speak. He knew when the bomb would go off. A lot of mages will be there that day, so it probably won't even last 10 minutes, but it will help. It will make everything related to magic not work for that duration. 10 minutes was enough. They just needed to save the people with bombs on them in those 10 minutes. They will be very visible. And, by that point, there will be a lot of humans and beast people to put to work, in addition to Choi Han and the dragon as well. Choi Han looked back and forth between the black orb and Cale, before taking a gulp and starting to speak. Cale Nim, you were planning to do all of this on your own dash. That is why. Cale knew what Choi Han was going to say. That was why he cut him off and started to speak to Choi Han and the dragon. Go and work. Choi Han blankly stared at Cale. Cale pointed to the beer bar that was famous for its beer and continued on. I will be waiting for you here. Just look around until about 11 before coming back for today. Choi Han thought for a moment, before letting out a sigh like laughter and nodding his head. Got it? Today, the dragon and I will just look around the interior of the plaza before returning. Choi Han had originally thought about asking why Cale was not going with them. However, he quickly realized it. Cale would only be baggage to Choi Han and the Black Dragon as they worked. Cale was weak. There was not even a trace of mana coming from Cale's body, nor did he look like he practiced any type of martial arts. He was plain, yet not plain at the same time. I will work hard, so please buy me a beer when I come back. Sure. Dragon, thanks for your help too. The Black Dragon got rid of the soundproof dome, as if to respond to Cale's words. Choi Han just slightly bowed his head before moving away from Cale. 2 hours later, Cale returned to the residence with Choi Han and the Black Dragon, who did not manage to find anything. They did not manage to find anything the next night either. Cale, who could not sleep at night, finally woke up in the middle of the day. He was not tired though, because the vitality of the heart made it difficult for Cale to feel tired. Young master, are you up? Ron. Cale's honey-like slumber disappeared like a dream, as he came back to reality. I have returned. Ron was back. He then handed a letter to Cale. Cale gave an order to Ron for the first time in a while after seeing the letter. Ron, go wrap up a bottle of the best wine. It was a letter with the crest of the Flynn Merchant Guild. Cale opened the letter to find a single sentence. Young Master Cale, will you be treating me to alcohol soon? The bastard son of the Flynn Merchant Guild's leader, Billows, would soon arrive at the capital. The letter helped Cale realize that it would not be long before he met the Crown Prince inside the palace. Since there were a lot of villains in there, it was time for him to be very, very still. Chapter 37, Being Still, 4. Ron nodded his head at Cale's words, but added one more thing before he left. I understand. By the way, young master, you do remember that you have to visit the palace the day after tomorrow, right? Before the king announces the start of the festival in the plaza, the nobles were scheduled to meet with the crown prince. It was neither a serious meeting nor a feast, but something in between. It was set to take place in a wing of the palace where important meetings usually took place. Cale thought about the crown prince and the palace before his mind drifted elsewhere. I wonder if Taylor and Cage are well. The fallen eldest son and the crazy priestess. Cale thought that the two of them were probably doing very well. But suddenly, his back felt chilly and he caressed the back of his head. That coldness made Cale make up his mind. Let's not think about the two of them. Cale will be very still at the palace. Even if someone curses him from the side, he will just sit there silently before returning here. Cale peeked at the table in front of them. There was a letter from Eric sitting there. Cale. You don't have to do anything at all. This young nem will take care of it all for you. Got it? Eric Wheelsman, one of the northeastern nobles, sent him a letter a day. It was very clear that Eric was worried about what might happen. Cale grabbed the letter on the table and chucked it to a corner. Then I will make sure to have them wrap up a bottle of our best alcohol. Cale was watching Ron leave, when he saw some faces he had not seen for a while enter through the open door. Ron peeked at the two of them before closing the door. The two that entered approached Cale and started to speak. I think I can kill them if they let their guard down. I see a way we can kill them. It was the kittens on Enhong. These two kittens, who Cale had not seen for a while, were excited, as they seemed to have found a way to kill the beast people who were as strong as the wolf tribe. The two kittens came and rubbed their faces on Cale's leg after hearing his compliment toward them. Cale pushed the two of them away because he found it annoying. Ron soon entered the room once again. Ron looked at Cale, who answered like he didn't care, before asking his question. May I go as your personal servant to the palace? Why are you asking such an obvious question? Who would go if it wasn't you? That answer made Ron make up his mind to leave. The people who called themselves Arm and ruled the eastern continent's underworld had started to expand their reach to the western continent. Arm was just one limb of the organization, and nobody knew their true identity. The Molan family was a fifth-generation assassin household that sought to rule the night in the eastern continent, and Ron Molan, the successor to the Molan family, hated and feared this Arm. You will be very cool in the palace. Cale looked toward Ron, who, after returning from his time off, was flattering him unlike his usual self, and casually asked. I do have a handsome face and figure, don't I? The kitten snorted at Cale, but they couldn't disagree. Cale was a handsome man with a slick figure. Kim Rock-Soo's favorite thing about Cale was his money, but right after that was Cale's body and face. Cale's lips looked like they wanted to form a smile. Of course. Our young master is the full package. But that smile quickly disappeared. What did I just hear right now? It was a very gentle, warm, and caring voice. It even sounded like Ron was playing along with him. Cale felt chills all over his body, and turned his head around to see Ron standing there with a satisfied smile on his face. It looked different from when he was pretending to be satisfied. Cale really felt chills all over his body now. But Ron did not care and continued to go on with his duties. Then I will head out for now. I need to go report to Deputy Butler Hans. Oh. Go ahead, quickly. Ron soon left, and Cale started to ponder while looking at the closed door. Why is he acting like this? But Cale did not want to find out the reason. What good would come from being interested in Ron's life? Cale stared at that closed door for a long time, before a confused expression filled his face. Someone was knocking on the door. The red kitten Hong started to speak. Smells like a wolf. Cale looked toward the door and started to speak. The door clicked and slowly started to open. Cale could see the wolf boy, Locke, awkwardly standing there. Locke hesitated for a bit, before starting to speak. Hello, I came to thank you. I didn't know when would be a good time to stop by, so, if it is okay with you, may I come in for a bit? Cale didn't want to hear this awkward voice any longer, so he waved Locke inside. Locke carefully closed the door with a nervous expression, and approached Cale. Cale pointed to the couch across from him. Locke sat down on the couch and peeked at Cale. Unlike his earlier words that made Locke think of his uncle, this person, named Cale Henituse, had an aura about him that made it difficult to approach him. Rather than it being difficult because he was strong like his uncle, it just felt like it would be difficult to talk to Cale. Say what is on your mind. You see. Locke seemed to be thinking about what to say, before jumping up from the seat and bowing toward Cale. Locke seemed very naive, scared, and, in some aspects, stupid. He definitely fit the profile described in the novel. His personality changed in the novel after going berserk for the first time, but it looks like it is still the same now. Cale responded to Locke's thank you. Sure. It is definitely something to be thankful for. Excuse me? Ah, yes. Locke had an odd expression on his face as he sat back down. Cale watched Locke sit and started to speak. No need to thank me anymore, you can go. Ah, well, actually. Locke could not stand back up, and just moved his lips without saying anything. He had heard stories from Rosalind, the two cat tribe kittens, Choi Han, and even Hans, which made him think things through over and over. He was still not done thinking things through. Cale just quietly watched Locke. It was because he knew how Locke would act that he was trying to quickly kick Locke out of here. Well, young master, you see. Locke didn't know how to start. He continued to peek at Cale every so often while staring at his feet. Locke lightly bit down on his lips a couple of times. He didn't like this personality of his very much. At that moment, Locke heard a cold voice. Spit it out. Locke lifted his head up to see Cale. This was the first time Locke made eye contact with Cale since coming into the room. Cale kept eye contact with Locke, as he continued to speak. Good. When you are talking to someone, you should make eye contact like this. He continued on. Spit out everything you want to say. Cale looked at the clock before looking back at Locke, who was looking at him with a blank expression on his face. I will at least listen to what you have to say. Locke let out a gasp. He clenched his fidgeting hands and finally started to speak. I am the older brother. His voice was weak. His body was large, but he was still a young boy. I need to take care of my younger siblings. Locke knew that he was still lacking a lot to be called a member of the wolf tribe. However, he had 10 younger siblings that he needed to protect and care for right now. In addition, I was also a nephew and a younger brother. The Blue Wolf tribe loved and cherished the cowardly and stupid Locke. He could not forget about his family, friends, and neighbors who cared for him so much. That is why I need to get my revenge. That was why he needed to pay them back for everything they took from him. Locke pressed down on his shaking hands and said whatever came to mind. Once he did that, he felt his head clearing up a bit. He then bowed his head and could see his feet and the carpet. He then heard a voice. Young wolf boy. Locke lifted his head up. Cale Henituse. This owner of a large residence that Locke couldn't even dream of when he lived in his village, was someone that Choi Han Hyung had said was worth betting at least of his life on. Such a man was bluntly speaking to him. You are a wolf. Locke started to recall many past memories. He could see his life in the Blue Wolf tribe. Wolves protect their families and put them first, before even themselves. I consider them to be a tribe to be proud of. Locke could see a smiling face in front of him. I have heard what you wanted to say. At that moment, Locke could clearly see this man and everything in this room. On either side of Cale were the cute cat tribe kittens, and the sunlight coming into the room made it seem very peaceful. Locke finally remembered the words that he needed to say, and the words he wanted to say. Thank you very much for your help. And, please help me. The owner of this peaceful atmosphere started to speak. Once was enough for the thanks. The reason Cale was thinking so much about how to act like a trash these days was because of Choi Han and the Black Dragon. The Black Dragon itself was a concern, while Choi Han was a concern because of the things he brought back with him. I do not wish to help you. Cale did not want to help Locke. However, he knew the pain the 10 wolf children were feeling after losing their parents and their support. He had experienced it himself. Furthermore, he already had a foot inside the situation. He did not want to be responsible for everything. He planned to do just the bare minimum, so that he would break even. Cale continued to speak toward Locke, who was lowering his head after hearing Cale say that he did not want to help him. However, I do have plans to make a deal with you. A deal? Cale continued to speak. What do you need help with? And what can you do for me in return? Cale had no desire to teach this wolf boy, who was not experienced with anything. That was for Choi Han or Rosalind to deal with. Cale stood up, as he still had a couple things to take care of before heading to the palace, before speaking once more to the wolf boy. Come back when you have the answers. Locke thought for a moment, before getting up from the seat and bowing his head. I understand. I will come back to see you when I have figured things out. Cale lightly patted Locke's head once. The gaze in Locke's eyes as he looked up was quite satisfactory. Cale grabbed the Crown Prince's invitation and got off the carriage. The gathering was to start at 5 p.m. Cale looked at the palace, that was incomparable to both the Henituse estate and their residence in the capital combined. The Palace of Joy. The name of the location of the gathering was called the Palace of Joy, and it was built by the king to share his joy of the birth of the Crown Prince. Of course, the king now favored the third prince. Cale was planning to meet up with Eric, Gilbert, and Amiru outside the palace and enter together. He looked toward the palace and started to think. Is this a cliché too? It just so happened that someone else arrived at the palace right when Cale arrived. Wow, who is this? Isn't this our famous young master Cale? Sigh. Cale held back his sigh. He could feel the distaste from the person before him just from their tone. The person approaching him was Neo, the successor to Viscount Toltz. Why do I have to run into one of Vanyan's minions now? Neo Toltz was one of the stereotypical villains. He went around doing Vanyan's biddings. The village that the Black Dragon was tortured in belonged to Viscount Toltz. And Viscount Toltz's people never liked the Henituse family. It was because, although they were separated only by a single mountain, the difference in wealth was drastic. However, in the past, they were once friendly with the Henituse family. That all changed once they went under Marquis Stan's faction 5 years ago. Of course, they wouldn't say it out loud, but they would stealthily try to take control of the Northeastern nobles meeting. Neo Toltz smiled brightly as he stood in front of Cale. You are alone. They were still a bit away from the palace entrance, and the vice-captain and Ron were speaking with the guard to get permission to enter. Cale, who brought only the minimal amount of people with him, looked down to Neo. Neo saw that Cale was alone, and thus pushed his subordinates back. I am going to chat with young Master Cale for a bit. Go get permission for us to enter. Neo sent his subordinates to the guard, and took one step closer to Cale. Once the two of them were standing very close, Neo started to speak. Neo had a warm and friendly smile on his face, as he spoke in a quiet voice that only Cale could hear. What is a terrible trash like you doing coming to the palace? Sigh, so childish. Is it like this because it is a world inside a book? Or is it because it is a fantasy world? Is it possible that punks like this exist in the real world too? They must exist since he's provoking me like this. The son of a viscount dares to speak like this to the son of a count? Cale thought it was only happening because it was a novel, but actually dealing with this made Cale extremely frustrated. I'm not even the MC. Can I not deal with clichés like this? Cale wanted to just tell Ron to kill these stupid villains who didn't know their place. Cale just continued to look down at Neo. Neo's expression brightened even more. To Neo, Cale was a trash who just looked fine on the outside. For someone like Neo, who had to suck up to Vanyan the entire time he was at the capital, Cale was a good prey to bother. What? Do you want to throw a bottle at me? Or do you want to hit me? Go ahead and try. He's just provoking me. He's doing it on purpose. He can't take any magic items into the palace, so he won't be able to take a magic recording device inside. That is why he's trying to rile me up out here. If Cale caused a ruckus here, it would be seen as a fight between a trash and a dignified noble. It would only be to Neo's advantage. That was why he was trying to provoke Cale to bring down the Henituse family name. Cale just sat there. He then heard a voice inside his head. It was the dragon speaking through magic. What a bastard! It reminds me of that bastard Vanian. He is Vanian's minion. Although Cale could not say that out loud, the dragon continued to speak in Cale's mind. Should I kill him? I don't think there's a need to do that. Cale shook his head to the dragon who was following him while remaining invisible. Seeing Cale shake his head made Neo provoke Cale once again, as it did not look like Cale was going to bite. At that moment, Cale's gaze turned to a new carriage that just arrived. Bang! The carriage door burst open as soon as the carriage stopped, and Eric wheelsman got out of the carriage. Gilbert and Amira were inside the carriage as well. Cale signaled Eric, who was rushing over with his eyes wide open, with his eyes while pointing to Neo with his index finger. Cale's sincere voice that called out to him, as well as the cold gaze in Cale's eyes, told Eric everything he needed to know. Get rid of him. The eyes of the calmly standing Cale were giving that message to Eric. Chapter 38, Being Still, 5. Ahem. Young Master Neo, it has been a while. Eric immediately moved in between Cale and Neo. Neo's eyes seemed to be defeated. He thought he had found a good prey, but it was now difficult to hunt this prey with Eric wheelsman present. Yes, young Master Eric. I hope you have been well. Neo greeted Eric that way before also greeting young Lady Amira and young Master Gilbert. He then saw them all standing in front of Cale, and clicked his tongue. I guess they are protecting him. Even if he is trash, he is still on their side after all. Neo decided not to do anything after seeing the three of them protecting Cale. Eric noticed Neo's intent, and slowly turned around to look at Cale. Neo's gaze turned to Cale as well. Neo then subconsciously let out a groan. Cale was quietly looking down at Neo with his arms crossed. Cale's eyes were extremely scornful. He had not said anything to Neo since earlier on, but his gaze and his body language said everything that needed to be said. Classless fool. It made Neo think about the gaze Vanian used to look at him. Even though Neo was angry when Vanian looked at him with such a gaze, he consoled himself by saying it was the look of a higher-ranking noble and let it go. Cale turned away after watching Neo's shaking pupils for a while, and looked behind him. He heard the Black Dragon's report in his ear. There was a reason he brought the Black Dragon with him today. The voice recording magic is ready. Cale had asked the Black Dragon to record everything that happened today. Video recording required a lot of mana usage and was difficult to maintain for a long period of time, so Cale had to be satisfied with just voice recording. Cale was originally not going to do this because the palace would have a lot of mages who were sensitive to mana, but the Black Dragon assured him that it would be undetected as long as the range of the voice recording was small. Cale made up his mind to use this in the future to make Neo cry tears of blood, before heading toward the palace entrance. Cale was the type of person to always pay back his debts. Eric wheelsman watched Cale walk away like a proud brother. He was thinking that the letters he sent every day must have worked. On the other hand, Gilbert and Amira watched Cale with curious expressions. Cale Henituse, the man who used to only wear flashy clothes, chose to wear a simple black outfit without any accessories. Even his red hair was clean and shining from the sun. They wondered if it was because Cale was not drunk. Each of Cale's steps looked relaxed and calm. Amira and Gilbert watched Cale turn around once he got to the palace entrance. Cale's gaze, that seemed to be beckoning them over, was the most curious thing for them. Young Master Neo, I will see you inside. Young Lady Amira and young Master Gilbert, let us go. Eric was watching Cale proudly, but Amira and Gilbert had an even stranger sensation when the three of them stood in front of Cale. Cale looked at the two confused people, as well as the proud Eric, and started to speak. The three of them followed Cale into the palace. Gilbert and Amiro's odd sensation continued to grow the farther they followed Cale. Cale did not care, however, and decided he would use these three people as much as he could today. Young Master Cale Nim of Count Henituse's household is entering the hall. Cale could hear the servant shout out Eric, Gilbert, and Amiro's names as well as he walked into the hall. Not bad. He looked around the large hall before walking behind Eric. Young Lady Amiro peeked toward Cale, before walking next to him and starting to speak. Young Master Cale. At the front of the banquet hall is the Crown Prince's seat, and the tables are split based by region. The reason for that dash dot. Amiro, who was about to explain the reason for why the tables are split based on region, looked at Cale's expression, before changing what she was going to say. I probably don't need to explain the reason, right? Thank you very much, young Lady Amiro, but I know the reason. Cale watched Amiro nod her head with a curious expression on her face, and then headed toward the tables to the northeast section of the room. There were 5 tables inside the hall. Northeast, northwest, southwest, southeast, and the center. They were all divided based on each of the noble factions. The Crown Prince is good at things like this. He controlled things in the background to make the factions compete with each other while also forcing them to come together every so often. It was the Crown Prince's specialty. But the Crown Prince was very thorough about his own treatment as well. The Crown Prince's table was located to the front of all 5 of these tables, at a location that was about 2 steps higher than the rest. The second and third prince's seats are 1 step lower than his. 1 step lower than the Crown Prince's table was the table for the second and third princes. Even if this event was being hosted by the Crown Prince, it would be weird for the second and third princes to not attend a gathering of nobles. Since the Crown Prince was the one to host it, he made sure to show a gap between their status. He really pays attention to these tiny, useless details. The Crown Prince, actually, all of the people in those positions of power, were really not Cale's type of people. Our table is closest to the entrance, as expected. Cale did not respond to Eric's bitter voice. The Palace of Joy had opened the eastern entrance as the designated entrance, and the northeastern region nobles' table was the closest to the door. Although the northeastern region had a voice, they did not have a household that was strong enough to have a loud voice. Cale raised his hand to pat Eric's shoulder. It's great that our seat is close to the door. In addition, it is great that we don't have anyone we have to lower our head to at our seat. Other regions had strong people in charge, like Marquis Stan, whom the rest had to be respectful to and subservient. The other 3 people walking with Cale stopped walking. Cale also stopped walking after seeing them halt. Eric turned around to look at Cale for a while, before finally starting to speak. Since they were in the company of others, Eric did not call Cale casually by name. I'm glad that my efforts seem to have paid off. Efforts? What efforts? Cale looked toward Eric with shock and confusion, but Eric turned back around and proudly walked to the table that was closest to the entrance. Eric did not know that Cale never read his letters and just shoved them to a corner of the room. Why is he like this? Young Lady Amiro shook her head at Cale's question. Gilbert showed a similar reaction. Cale then shrugged his shoulders and headed toward the table. But an announcement made him stop moving. Young Master Vanyan Stan of Marquis Stan's household has arrived. Cale understood why Neotoltz did not follow them inside the Palace of Joy. Vanyan. Neotoltz was standing right behind Marquis Stan's successor, Vanyan. But Cale did not care for chumps like Neo or Vanyan. Cale. Eric called out to Cale, who suddenly started quickly walking to his seat, but Cale just waved him off and sat down. Ah, welcome young Master Cale. Hello, young Master Cale. Cale gave a short response to all of those respectful greetings. Hello. Good to see all of you. Silence suddenly filled the table, and Cale put his hand underneath the tablecloth without others noticing. He could feel the invisible black dragon's body shaking. I'm okay. I told you that I am okay. Cale listened to the black dragon's voice in his head, and patted its shaking body. Anger and fear. The black dragon's mind was full of both right now. That was why trauma when you are young is so scary. The black dragon did not know how to respond because the physical trauma that its body remembered was not aligned with the rationality in its head. I am okay. I am a great and mighty dragon. Cale had told the black dragon when it said it wanted to follow him that Vanyan Stan would be here as well. He also got the black dragon to promise that it would not kill Vanyan Stan today. He also promised something else to the dragon. Later. I will definitely kill that bastard and the rest later. The black dragon was planning on ripping them into shreds so that they turned into fine particles of dust. Cale calmed the black dragon down while listening to its extremely angry voice. Thankfully, it didn't seem to be causing its mana to go wild because of this anger. Cale thought that dragons really were very rational creatures. Cale thought about the hell that awaited Vanyan and the idiots who were aligned with Marquis Stan in the future, and stopped patting the dragon. Thankfully, it did not seem like the dragon was going to run wild. If it did, this palace would easily be destroyed, and Cale would probably be dead as well. Cale let out a sigh of relief, before looking around. He could see Eric's group and Vanyan's group both heading this way. It made sense, since Vanyan's table was the northwest table next to them. The black dragon rubbed his head on Cale's leg. The black dragon's action made Cale worry for a moment. He made eye contact with Eric at that time, who was fervently signaling Cale with his eyes. Stay quiet. Be still. Cale just ignored the signals. He then debated how he could pretend not to know Vanyan. However, all of his contemplations were for naught, as Vanyan greeted him first. Long time no see, young Master Cale. Vanyan Stan. He seemed to have gotten many more wrinkles since the last time they met, but he was still showing a gentle smile, fitting for a noble. However, Neotoltz was behind him looking extremely anxious. Cale smiled brightly and started to speak. Hello, young Master Vanyan. This is our first meeting since we met in Viscount Toltz's territory last time. Vanyan's gentle smile became thicker, while Neo's face became completely pale. Marquis Stan was one of the 4 leaders in the kingdom's politics. The successor of such a person visited the northeast region. Not only that, it was to a low-ranking noble territory like Viscount Toltz's territory. It was obviously showing that Viscount Toltz was under the Marquis faction. Naturally, the northeastern nobles all started to frown, and the other nobles in the hall started to pay attention as well. The northeast was a region without a leader right now. Correct. I went to visit my friend, young Master Neo, and was heading back home. Vanyan Stan did not care about the gazes that were heading his way. There was no problem for him to go to the northeast region. Vanyan was looking at Cale, as if he was observing him, but his voice was still gentle. Yes. We said we would share a drink at the capital. We did indeed. Both Cale and Vanyan seemed very calm while chatting with each other. However, the people watching them could not be as calm. Cale looked toward Neotoltz, who was peeking at him and started to smile. Neo flinched while looking at Cale's smile. Ah, right. The day after I met you, young Master Vanyan, one of the Viscount Toltz's knights came to find me. Cale started to speak to Neo with a very concerned expression. I heard the villa was ransacked completely clean. Is everything okay? Neo's shoulders flinched, and Cale could see the corner of Vanyan's lips starting to twitch. Did you hear about it, young Master Vanyan? I'm sure you have, since you said the 2 of you are good friends. Vanyan finally responded after a bit of time. He was speaking very naturally, but Cale could feel the anger inside Vanyan's words. Yes. It was very sad to hear. Yes. You don't know how shocked I was to hear about it while I was having my hangover drink. How could they ransack the place clean and not leave anything behind? They said you lost something very important, young Master Neo. The most annoying people in the world were the ones with loose lips, the ones with no tact, and the righteous. Cale was acting like all three right now. He was having so much fun. Cale warmly spoke to Neo. "Young Master Neo, cheer up. We're bound to face such unbelievable situations at least once in our lives." "Ah, yes. I suppose so." Neo could not even look at Vanyan, as he just haphazardly responded to Cale. "You need to drink to forget about everything when something terrible like that happens. Young Master Neo, let's get wasted tonight. Young Master Vanyan, would you like to join us as well?" Vanyan calmly observed Cale. He had lost the Marquis's trust since losing the Black Dragon. Vanyan was suspecting the organization that gave him the Black Dragon based on the knight's testimony and the evidence left behind, but he could not get rid of the suspicion he had for Cale's group, who happened to spend a night there at the same time. But he didn't have any good reasons to suspect Cale. That was why he had spoken to Cale to confirm one more time. If you drink and then wake up to have a hangover drink, all your bad memories will disappear. But seeing Cale Henituse continue to spew nonsense like before made Vanyan realize he did not need to confirm anything. "Thank you for the offer, young Master Cale. Maybe next time." "Ah, it's disappointing, but I guess next time it is." Vanyan walked past Cale. As he did, he could hear Cale speaking to Neo. "Your knight was extremely pale, young Master Neo. You should have prepared in advance for such a situation. How could you lose all those valuable things at once? Cheer up. You may not recover what you lost, but what can you do about it? You have to just live on." Sigh. "That trash." Vanyan smiled at the nobles who were observing him after hearing that he went to the northeast, and held back his anger. "That stupid dragon and that paralyzed son of a bitch. Where did all of them go?" Vanyan only looked forward as he walked. After taking a peek at Vanyan walking away, Cale turned away from the extremely pale Neo without any hesitation. Of course, he gave Neo a final remark before doing so. "Cheer up." Cale knew that Neo would be ripped a new one by Vanyan. "Young Master Cale dash." Cale watched Eric, who looked like he had a lot to say but could not figure out how to say it, before sitting back down. "It is my turn next." Cale nodded his head after hearing the Black Dragon's voice, and looked around the table. The northeastern nobles were all looking at him. This was probably the first time they've ever seen such a normal version of Cale. That was why Cale picked up the bottle of alcohol in front of him to meet their expectations. They all looked away almost instantly. This was the strength of a trash. However, the people at other tables were still watching Cale with curiosity. Cale ignored those gazes, as he handed the bottle to Eric. "I'll drink it later." "Sure." Cale looked away from Eric, who was speaking informally for the first time since coming into the palace, and looked at the clock at the hall entrance. It would soon be time for the feast to start. That was why the nobles all took their seats. The reason was obvious. With Vanyan Stan's entrance, the remaining three powerful families entered as well. Young Master Antonio Jair of Duke Jair's household has arrived. Antonio Jair of Duke Jair's family, young Lady Karen Orsina of Duke Orsina's family, and Marquis Elan, the other Marquis of the kingdom. They all entered into the hall with their subordinates behind them. The door closed after all of them entered, but there was nobody who got up to chat with them. Cale leaned comfortably in his chair and looked toward the banquet hall entrance. The clock was getting close to 5 p.m. The clock reached exactly 5 p.m. Skreek. The large door opened and the main characters for this gathering showed up with their entourage. The servant was ready to shout louder than he had shouted all night, but the person in front lifted his hand up to stop the servant. Roan Kingdom's crown prince, the eldest prince of the kingdom, Albro Crossman. He seemed to enjoy the attention on him, as he headed to his elevated seat without any introduction. All of the nobles got up to greet him, and Crown Prince Albro left the second and third princes behind as he headed to the highest spot in the hall. As soon as he stood in front of his seat, the door closed. It meant that everyone was present. Crown Prince Albrew looked down at the second and third princes, as well as everyone else, and started to speak. "Welcome. Thank you for responding to my invitation." This was somewhere where he did not need an introduction. Albrew looked down from the top. Cale blankly looked up at him, before looking back at the clock. It's about time they got here. The person who would be the gossip of all of the nobles here for a while had not arrived just yet. Cale could hear the Crown Prince starting to speak. "Precious individuals who will make this kingdom shine, the future leaders of our kingdom, this prince is very happy that all of you have come to this gathering." The Crown Prince was slowly turning on the engines of his glib tongue. It was at that moment. The Crown Prince turned his gaze to the entrance. The closed door was being pushed, as if it was being reopened. He could hear some chattering through the gap that was created. Cale started to secretly smile. At that moment, a servant urgently rushed to the Crown Prince from a different entrance. "They're here." Cale was certain. At that moment, the Crown Prince seemed to be deep in thought for a moment, before he waved at the knight who peeked inside. The large door opened once again. Since it was after the Crown Prince, the servant did not dare call out the person's name. But there was no need to do so. Right on time. A wheelchair entered into the banquet hall. Taylor Stan, the paralyzed eldest son of Marquis Stan. He had arrived at the banquet hall with the crazy priestess Cage. At that moment, Taylor and Cage's gazes quickly moved past Cale without anybody noticing. But that was enough for the three of them. 1. Cale sounds like a Lannister. PR, Game of Thrones nerd. 2. PR, I love this little bastard. Chapter 39, Being Still, 6. The banquet hall's door closed tightly once more. Taylor Stan was wearing luxurious and formal clothes, even though he was on a wheelchair, and there was a relaxed smile on his face. Priestess Cage was wearing the God of Death priestess robe. I guess they decided to flat out reveal their identities. Cale thought it was a wise decision. The temple of the God of Death may get a headache over it, but why would Cage care about that? "What is this?" A shocked and angry voice came from the northwest table. When Cale turned to look, Vanian jumped out of his seat in anger, as he glared at Taylor. This was a reaction you would normally never see out of Vanian, and a reaction that went against the noble etiquette, but Vanian was not in a state to care about etiquette right now. Cale looked up to the top of the platform. Crown Prince Albrew opened his arms and started to speak. "I did not expect to see Marquis Stan's eldest son, Taylor Stan, and a priestess of the God of Death here." The Crown Prince seemed happy. Taylor showed his respects while still sitting on his wheelchair. "I heard that there was an opportunity for the kingdom's nobles to meet with and discuss with your majesty. I do apologize for coming without an invitation." The Crown Prince Albrew had a smirk on his face. Cale could tell from that smirk that Albrew properly understood what Taylor meant by being able to have a discussion with the Crown Prince. "I did ask for each household's representative, but if the household does not have a representative, there is no issue with who shows up. I guess you were probably upset that I only sent one invitation to the Marquis' household, Mr. Taylor." "Just a bit, Your Majesty." Cale peeked toward Vanian. A household without a representative. Although it wasn't official, everybody knew that Vanian was going to be the successor to the Marquis. The Crown Prince's words were said to subtly take a dig at Vanian. It was probably because Marquis Stan was close to the third prince. That is the weird part. Cale found that fact to be weird. Although Cale didn't care about it and didn't look into it, but, even if the king cherished the third prince, it should not be easy to replace the Crown Prince. Even still, the Crown Prince was uncomfortable and wary of the second and third princes in the novel, and Marquis Stan was close to the third prince. The other factions all had a prince they supported as well. I guess there is something there. Naturally, that something was something that Cale did not want to know about. I do feel bad for making you upset. But, I am glad that you look very healthy, Mr. Taylor. It has been a while since we last met. Taylor smiled and responded to the Crown Prince. Your Majesty, my legs may not move, but my hands, head, eyes, ears, mouth, and everything else are still very much alive. No, in fact, they have gotten even stronger. I see. Indeed, you are still alive. I have forgotten the fact that the strongest is the one who manages to live until the end. Cale could see that the Crown Prince was completely hooked. He then turned to see that Vanian once again had a noble-like expression on his face, but he was still glaring at Taylor with a piercing glare. Cale found this situation to be quite entertaining. It will be fun to watch. The Crown Prince, Taylor, Vanian, and the nobles of the different factions. It was fun looking at the expressions on all of their faces. It made Cale long for some popcorn. This was a tense situation that could burst at any moment. Cale liked it very much that he was just going to be still. Then is the lady a priestess of the god of death? This servant of eternal rest named Cage greets your majesty. Cage seemed like a saint, as she said the traditional greeting of the priestesses of the god of death. However, there was an enormous amount of knowledge regarding curses in her mind. The Crown Prince received Cage's greeting, before speaking to Taylor. Let us talk later. It is time for this gathering to start. I am not sure where to sit the two of you. The Crown Prince confirmed that he would make some time to chat with Taylor later. Cale peeked over to the northwest table. All of them were full of concern and anxiety. Neotoltz was especially bad, as he seemed to be extremely anxious and fidgety. Cale started to smile after seeing Neotoltz acting that way. Neo frowned and turned his way, thinking about how there could be such a stupid idiot who could not tell what was going on right now. Cale watched Neo's actions with a smile, before lifting his head up and turning to look in Taylor's direction. It was at that moment. Cale made eye contact with the Crown Prince. It was a coincidence. The Crown Prince Albrew was looking around to see where a good spot for Taylor and Cage may be, and Cale was turning to look at Taylor. But in the process, the two of them made eye contact. Cale had a bad feeling right away. Right here. I guess there is a good spot for you. The Crown Prince made up his mind, and Cale quickly realized where it would be. I guess this is the only possible spot. This was the only table without a high-ranking noble. Although there were families who chose to become subservient to the different factions, there was still a balance of power on this table. Furthermore, there was a household on this table that was the strong and wealthy enough that even the high-ranking nobles did not dare to poke at it. Mr. Taylor can sit at the Northeast nobles' table. There just happens to be some extra seats there. Gasp. Cale heard Neo's gasp and saw Eric's concerned expression as he turned his gaze to Taylor and Cage. Thank you for providing seats for us, Your Majesty. Thank you very much, Your Majesty. It was nothing. We should work together with people who will make great contributions to the kingdom in the future. The Crown Prince said that as he looked toward the Northeast nobles' table. Servants quickly rushed over to the table, as Albrew started to speak. Can we fix up the seats a bit? Who could say no to the Crown Prince? Eric stood up and responded to Albrew. Of course, Your Majesty. Eric was able to act this way because he needed to talk to Albrew about investing in the northeastern shoreline and because he has refused to become subservient to another high-ranking noble. His actions made the other nobles on the table stand up as well, and the servants quickly worked to set up the table to include Taylor and Cage. It progressed without any problems. But Cale, who had been watching this from the side, started to notice something odd. Eric noticed Cale's expression, and quickly came over with a concerned expression to whisper to Cale. Cale, remember. Be still. Just be still. Cale ignored Eric's words and looked at his seat. The new guests were going to be seated next to Cale. This was probably decided by the Crown Prince as well. It's not like he can put them next to someone else's dog. Our family is the strongest of the remaining 4 households. The servants bowed after they finished fixing up the table, before departing. Please sit. Albra gestured to the group, and Cale quickly walked over to sit back down. There was no chair to his side, however, a wheelchair soon came to fill that spot. Nice to meet you. Taylor greeted the northeastern nobles as he joined them. Cage naturally sat down next to Taylor. The 2 of them, no, all 3 of them, including Cale, pretended like this was their first meeting with each other. This is entertaining. Cale agreed with the Black Dragon's voice that was transmitted in his mind and looked toward the Crown Prince. Then, although it was slightly delayed, let us resume. The Crown Prince announced the start of the gathering. I wanted to gather together the individuals who will bring forth the future of our kingdom and share a meal together. Thank you all for showing up, and I hope we have a wonderful meal. As soon as the Crown Prince finished speaking, the servants entered with plates of food for each table. An orchestra started to play background music from the back of the hall as well. This was the difference with a real feast. It was a mix of a feast and discussion, with moving between tables being natural. Young Master Cale, we plan to go greet the Crown Prince in a bit. Cale nodded his head at Amiro's statement, and focused on the food on his plate. But his mind became a bit complicated. What is his intention? There was no way the Crown Prince just called the nobles together for no reason. He definitely had a reason. Cale had a few different ideas about what it may be. It might be because of the war in the western continent's southern region, or because he caught wind about the civil war that will happen in the Whipper Kingdom. The Whipper Kingdom was where Princess Rosalind was headed to, the kingdom with the magic tower. A civil war will soon break out in the Whipper Kingdom. A war would break out between the mages and the non-mages. There were a lot of thoughts in his head, but Cale decided to stop thinking about it. No need for me to care, since I will just be very still. It was none of Cale's business. He just started to enjoy the food in front of him. Looks yummy. Looks so yummy. The weak humans are very good at cooking. Cale enjoyed the food while listening to the Black Dragon's envious ranting. The food in the palace really was delicious. His hand subconsciously headed for the wine glass that the servant had left for him, but it quickly disappeared. Cale, just 5 minutes. Cale nodded his head at Eric's sincere plea, and turned back to the food. The rest of the northeastern nobles quietly watched him. The Northeast was already in an awkward situation with the 10 families broken apart into different factions, but now, this magic bomb-like character, Taylor Stan, was a part of that table as well. People watched Cale, who could eat in such a tense situation, with curiosity. Cale could hear the Black Dragon's voice in his head. By the way, there are magic video recording tools all around this hall. Cale let out a gasp and started to smile. Anybody watching him would think he acted this way because he ate something especially delicious. I know at least one thing. Cale then felt like he figured out one of the Crown Prince's goals. First of all, the Crown Prince was watching the nobles. The second and third prince naturally know about this as well. Which means, this was something the entire royal family wanted. The corner of Cale's lips moved up just a bit. Eric, who became uncomfortable looking at that smile, jumped up from his seat. Amiru and Gilbert followed him up as well. There were already many nobles who went up to greet the Crown Prince. Cale slowly got up after seeing the 3 of them get up, and lightly brushed his hair back as he started to speak. Shall we go? Cale stood behind the 3 nobles, and headed up the platform to meet with the Crown Prince. Oh, our northeastern nobles. The Crown Prince welcomed the 4 of them with a bright smile. The Crown Prince had been shaking hands with everybody who came up to greet him. Albra Crossman. His blonde hair and blue eyes made him look like a live version of a fairytale prince. The beautiful blonde hair was something that was unique to the Crossman family, the royal family of the Roan Kingdom. They called it the symbol of receiving the sun god's blessing. Your Majesty, it is great to see you. Eric Wheelsman greets His Majesty for the first time in a while. Yes, yes, Mr. Eric. Don't we have something to talk about? Eric responded back to the Crown Prince, who brought up the Northeastern Shoreline investment issue with a bright expression. Yes. I have been waiting for a good moment to discuss it with you. I am also waiting for that moment. You are the intelligent young master of Count Wheelsman's family. The Wheelsman family is responsible for the entrance to the Northeast region, and has been doing a very good job. How could I push that off? He's slowly getting into it. Cale quietly stood there while watching Eric, who was smiling at the Crown Prince, who was slowly activating his glib tongue. The Crown Prince was praising Gilbert and Amiru as well. Interesting. Cale quietly watched it all until it was his turn. The Crown Prince reached his hand out to Cale, who slightly bowed his head. Mr. Cale of the Henituse family, that is responsible for the edge of our northeastern region. It may be my first time meeting you, but, thanks to Count Dirutha's good work, we are no longer afraid of the forest of darkness. You don't know how reassuring that is for me and everyone else. Cale had one goal while coming here today. I heard that Mr. Cale is a very free spirit. I'm sure this is because the artistic souls of the sculptures in the Henituse territory have given you an epiphany. I feel like your free spirit makes your soul very pure. It was probably difficult to find praise for someone who was famous for being a trash like this. In that aspect, the Crown Prince was amazing. However, he had no choice but to talk good about Cale, as long as Cale does not do anything trashy in this gathering. The royal family wanted the Northeast under their control as well. Furthermore, there were no members of royalty who would despise someone like Count Henituse, who ruled over his territory very well. That is why this preference for certain people will not impact the families. Cale sincerely grabbed the Crown Prince's hand, as he started to use his own glib tongue. It was his turn now. The Crown Prince had blonde hair and was wearing a formal outfit. Cale had his red hair and a formal outfit as well. Both of them looked relaxed. Cale's calm voice filled the air. I also felt something after meeting your Majesty today. I realized that in addition to our current son, His Highness, we also have you, the one who will shine over the night to watch over the citizens at night. It was a wonderful image for my eyes. Cale's voice was very calm and relaxed, and he looked very confident. Is that so? But the Crown Prince seemed confused for a moment, before his expression returned to normal. Cale did not miss this change. Cale continued on in a sincere voice. Indeed, Your Majesty. I may not be able to sleep at night now that I have personally met you, the star in the mind of our citizens. Eric's jaws dropped, while Gilbert and Amiru could not help look at Cale in disbelief. Cale could see the Crown Prince starting to think. He felt like he had taken another step toward his goal of getting away from the Crown Prince. At that moment, the Black Dragon muttered something odd. Why did this weakling called the Crown Prince dye his hair with magic? It is at a level that only a great and mighty dragon like me would notice it. Did another dragon dye his hair? No, is it some other type of power? At this moment, Cale realized that he had learned another useless secret that he could not even reveal the tiniest bit to anyone else. Is it a secret of a birth this time? Cale did not care to know about such things. Chapter 40, Don't Know, I Don't Know, 1. Cale gently smiled at the prince, and started to think. Don't know. I don't know. The black dragon kept on dragging on about asking why a dragon would ever use its magic for such an useless man and how he would never do such a thing, but Cale tried his best to not listen. His pupils are also dyed. This weakling is definitely plotting something. Weak human, be careful. If you stop talking, I think I'll be fine. This person is not weak. Weak human, be extra careful. You will die. Cale was frightened of this black dragon, that was explaining useless things, for the first time. At the same time, Cale's mind began to think quickly. The prince's mother was not the queen. She was a concubine, and she originally was a servant, one of the citizens who worked in the royal family. The third prince's mother was the current queen. The crown prince's mother is said to have had a questionable death when the crown prince was young. Cale started to naturally think about the true identity of the crown prince's mother. The prince was known to be average, but the dragon was saying that he is not weak. In the novel, even Choi Han judged the crown prince to be normal, so what was he hiding? And how did the dragon find out? No. Whether he hides it or not, it is not my business. Cale did not listen to the murmuring black dragon. Something must have been really interesting, as the black dragon continued to talk about the crown prince. Mr. Cale seems to be a bit like me. The crown prince was saying something, but Cale was too busy thinking about things, so he just casually responded. Your Majesty, such statement is the biggest honor of my life. The crown prince let go of Cale's hand, as if he was nervous. Cale did not notice the nervousness, and stepped back without a word, moving behind Eric. It was easy to use Eric as a shield when things got complicated. The crown prince observed Cale with curiosity, before turning his gaze over to Eric. Eric started to speak with the crown prince once again. Cale watched him and started to think. There is a reason. There was a reason the crown prince was wary of the second and third princes. There was also a reason as to why the king's favor suddenly went to the third prince. He was able to guess it all. Is he not really his son? Or is there a different secret to his birth? Cale's mind went to a drama that Kim Rock-soo saw while working at a restaurant after graduating high school. The crown prince, Albra Crossman, was naturally the main character. Cale reaffirmed himself once more. Be still. He would be still from here on. He made the decision to not find out about anything else. Cale thoroughly kept that promise. He did not drink any alcohol today, and that led to the nobles from other regions, who had never met him previously, approaching him to talk. Cale looked to Eric every time, and Eric got to work. After this happened a couple of times, Cale quietly mumbled to himself. Oh. This is pretty nice. Gilbert and Amira flinched after hearing that quiet murmuring, and started to talk to each other using their eyes. Isn't this weird? Right. The two of them slightly moved away from Eric and Cale. However, Cale looked toward young Lady Amira, and Amira stopped moving backward after making eye contact with Cale. By the way, young Lady Amira, I heard the shoreline of your territory is extremely beautiful. Is it true? Of course. The cliffs overlooking the coast are very beautiful. Beautiful my ass. Cale thought about the cliff and about how it would be extremely difficult to earn the sound of the wind. In the novel, the sound of the wind was an ancient power that a member of the non-mage faction in Whipper Kingdom ended up finding. Although it might be strange that a person from the Whipper Kingdom ended up with an ancient power in the Roan Kingdom, there was a long story behind that as well. Anyways, that power originally went to a mage slayer, an extremely brutal fool who appears near the second half of the Civil War. He was already strong enough that he didn't really put it to much use. The magic tower will fall soon. After the Civil War, a new magic tower would be built on the site of the fallen magic tower, and Rosalind will end up being in charge of that new magic tower. Choi Han, the mage slayer, and the Empire's crown prince. These three people are the ones who appear as the heroes for all of the incidents in the middle of the Western continent. The novel also discussed how the Queen of the Western continent's southern jungle ended up getting involved with the matter of unifying the South as well. Putting the secret organization that Choi Han constantly runs into aside, this continent will break its 200-year-long peace to start fighting for power. Cale looked toward Eric, who was dealing with everything for him, and looked at the clock. The feast would be over soon. Of course, the nobles were waiting for the conversation time that would happen after the meal. None of my business. It was none of Cale's business. Young Master Gilbert, I should be able to leave after the meal is over, right? Gilbert looked toward Cale, who was leisurely eating fruit like he was out on a picnic, and nodded his head. Yes. We plan to meet with the Crown Prince after the meal, but you probably don't plan to go with us, right? Right. What good will I do there? The three of you are more informed about the investment information. Gilbert's expression changed at Cale's words. He seemed to be a bit surprised. You read the document? A bit. Cale casually responded, before looking back at the Crown Prince, who stood up from his seat. He was about to announce the end of the meal. Cale did not find out the real reason behind today's gathering, but he was not disappointed about it. Not knowing meant there was no chance of him getting caught up in it. But Cale started to frown after hearing the Crown Prince's words. It was a pleasure to share this dinner with all of you tonight. I have prepared a simple wine party for those who may be interested, so please enjoy yourselves. I have also prepared a spot for all of you at the birthday celebration that is coming up. The Crown Prince Albrecht said all of this with a rather pleasant expression. I hope that you will all be there to share in the joys of the day. Cale held back his sigh. Although Albrecht was saying he hoped they would all be there, it was pretty much forcing them to be there. I guess I'll be in the plaza when the bombs go off. Although it was to be expected, Cale did not like it very much. Then let us conclude this dinner. Cale stood up from his seat. The majority wanted to go to the wine party with the Crown Prince and the second and third princes, but those who were not approved to meet with the Crown Prince could not go, even if they wanted to do so. Cale peeked toward the wheelchair that was moving past him. Taylor passed by him and Cage, who was pushing Taylor's wheelchair, followed directly afterward and whispered in a quiet voice that only Cale could hear. See you later, our little brother. I said I didn't want to be their little brother. Cale's gaze clearly showed his feelings, but Cage just pretended to not understand and headed toward the Crown Prince, while pretending to be a good and pure priestess. Young Master Cale, let me walk you out. Young Lady Amiru. Amiru approached Cale and offered to walk with him. Cale looked toward Amiru's green hair and calm yet sophisticated expression, and casually asked. Are you worried I will cause trouble on my way out? Unfortunately, young Master Neo was heading back early as well. She was saying she was going with him in case Neo tried to start something again. Cale headed toward the banquet hall door without any other questions, with Amiru next to him. The two of them arrived at Cale's carriage without saying much, and found Ron waiting by the carriage. Young Master Cale, good job today. Cale nodded his head at Amiru's words. It was hard. But you have to go back and work some more, young Lady Amiru. Amiru smiled and started to speak. It is because we need to get some good news. However, Cale could sense the despair in her voice. The northeastern coast was really a useless piece of land. It was a place filled with cliffs, with nothing else being interesting. Furthermore, the whirlpools around the cliffs were also a problem. The experienced people living in the territory knew how to avoid them, but it was a dangerous place for others. The sound of the wind is responsible for the whirlpools. Amiru and Gilbert would want to get some investment in this useless sea, no matter what. Cale looked toward Amiru, who spoke with a strange expression on her face. I believe we are capable of getting such results. Yes, young Master Cale. Cale thought it wouldn't be bad to give some help to Eric, Gilbert, and Amiru, whom he worked today like the beast people under his command. They still needed a balance of power in the Northeast Nobles meeting, and Amiru seemed like someone who would keep secrets pretty well. I believe His Highness will be pretty interested in this investment. I think so too. Amiru agreed with Cale's statement. It was because the Crown Prince remembered the issue, even without Eric bringing it up first. You discussed an investment for tourism, right? Investing in tourism using the coastal cliffs. In Cale's opinion, it was completely useless. He approached Amiru and whispered in her ears. If you are in desperate need of investment, I think it would be good for you to think about the value of the location of your shoreline in relation to the Whipper Kingdom and the other northern kingdoms. Cale shrugged his shoulders at the confused Amiru and added on. Of course, it would be best if you kept what I just said to yourself. I will remember your words for now. Cale was satisfied with Amiru, who seemed confused, but kept her mouth shut. He got on the carriage and waved to Amiru. Amiru lightly moved her head to respond to his wave. Cale started to speak to Ron, who was closing the carriage door. The carriage soon started to move. Cale looked out at Amiru, who was seriously contemplating what Cale had said without heading back in, and started to think about the northeastern shoreline. The northwestern shoreline was made up of sandy beaches. In comparison, Amiru and Gilbert's territory's shoreline was complicated, with many small islands. Furthermore, they were also surrounded by sharp cliffs. Finally, there were only a few places where ships could safely be anchored. Of course, the fishermen there were veterans who would be able to avoid the whirlpool to safely fish without any issues. They only thought about tours and sightseeing because the peace had lasted so long. But the Crown Prince will know that the end of the peace was quickly approaching. Anyways, all I have to do is go get the ancient power before that mage slayer takes it for himself. Cale decided not to think about it anymore. That night, 2 reports were delivered to Cale, as he headed back from the feast. We found 4 of the magic bombs. In the novel, there were 5 located in different places, and 5 located on people. All of them were around the plaza. Show me the map. Cale reached his hand out to Choi Han. Choi Han had left the Black Dragon at the site of the magic bombs and had returned by himself. He seemed to have rushed back, as there was sweat on his face. We found one, and then I ran around with the dragon in my arms to thoroughly look everywhere. We ended up finding 3 more in the process, but nothing more. I'm sure we need to look somewhere other than the plaza, but there were none in the places we've looked so far. No need to rush, since it will be safe until the day of the celebration in 2 days. But it is better to get rid of dangerous things earlier. Let's steal them in early morning of the celebration day. The magic bombs Cale knew about required the developer to send a signal to blow them up. However, for anyone at the Black Dragon or even Rosalind's level of magic, it was pretty easy to cut the connection between the developer and the bombs even if it took some time to do so. That was how Rosalind was able to destroy the bombs on the people in the novel. That needs to be done the day of the celebration. That was the only way to make that bloodthirsty mage think everything is fine. Steal them? We are not going to destroy them. Cale handed the map back to the confused Choi Han, and started to speak. Why would we destroy such useful things? Even if the bombs cannot be used, the densely packed mana inside was a pretty useful ingredient. I will use it for myself. Choi Han thought Cale's smile was pretty sneaky. Cale continued to speak to Choi Han, who accepted the map with a confused expression. Keep looking since there may be more. Check back multiple times to see if the location of the bomb changes as well. Choi Han and the Black Dragon will now need to stay hidden around the plaza and continue to investigate. It will be hard, boring, and extremely taxing on their minds, but it was not something Cale was going to do himself. Cale looked toward An and Hong, who just woke up from their nap and started to sleep. Time to pay up. Cale also spoke to Choi Han. Go work. The 2 kittens, who were rubbing their eyes tiredly, and Choi Han went to work as Cale had instructed. Cale leisurely watched them jump off the terrace window, before drinking the wine he did not get the chance to drink at the banquet, before falling asleep. A piece of information was delivered to Cale while he was sleeping. Cale was able to hear the news after waking up. Billows was going to arrive at the capital today, the day before the birthday celebration. Cale immediately headed to the inn where he was going to meet Billows. It was the place the 10 wolf children were staying. Of course, An, Hong, and Locke were with Cale as he headed to the inn. He thought about what Locke just said, and asked. "You want me to take care of your siblings?" "Yes. That is the condition for my deal." "And what can you do for me?" "It is not just me that will do it," Locke answered without any hesitation. "If it is not just you, who else?" Locke quickly answered. "My siblings will do it with me. We are stronger as a group." Cale felt the back of his head turning chilly. "No way." Locke ruthlessly hit Cale with another mental blow. "The Blue Wolf tribe has a famed history of being strong knights. That history is not something I need to know about." Cale turned away from Locke, who was sitting across from him in the carriage. 1. PR, OMG, I love this guy. Part 6 of the series ends here. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like and subscribe so we can be motivated to make even better videos in the future.